4 things coming from Prime Minister. First, a couple of clarifications. Second, why kids in this family is going to be the most important and vulnerable stakeholders. Third, why the work of nurturing is exclusively possible and better on our world, and the parent-child relationship is going to be better. Fourth, why the relationship between the parents themselves are necessarily going to be better on our world. So, a couple of clarifications. This debate is not about changing the family, changing an existing household into another one. It's just a vacuum comparison of which is better. It is also not a societal analysis. It's not that we have more households, so this is better for society. It's in a vacuum, we're comparing which family is better. Also, because the motion reads parents, this household is necessarily going to be one that has kids, however many they may be. So, why in this household are kids going to be the most important and vulnerable stakeholders? 4 reasons. First, they did not choose to be born in this family, unlike the parents. The parents chose to make this family, the kids did not. Secondly, they just have intrinsically less agency because they have less financial capability and less experience. So, they are in every single act they do, they are very highly reliant on the parents. Thirdly, they are in their developmental stages of their lives, which means that the impact of each and every single activity or thing that happens to them reaches far beyond what they experience right now and later on into their lives, and it impacts the future generations much worse. Fourthly, I think the parent relationship dynamics reach far beyond the parents and then into the future as well. This is why kids are necessarily going to be the most important stakeholder in the household. So, I think that based on this analysis, why in the process of raising a child is having 2 separate roles that divided better? I think that first, it's very obvious that simple household labor and doing things like that are going to be hard. But I think opposition may argue that, oh, both of you are working, you have more money, get a nanny. Okay, maybe that is replaceable. But we have some unreplaceable benefits on our end, which is the emotional connection you get with the child, and also the ability to observe what your child needs and wants. Parents, because they need to make this, as I mentioned before, because they need to make certain decisions, almost every single decision in the place of their child, it is crucial in their role that they observe the preferences and characteristics of their child. Oh, my child seems to like this, I should push more resources into supporting this. Or I'm worried about my child having this kind of characteristic, I should stop this. I think these observations are crucial, and it's the first step to actually doing good parenting and supporting your child in the right way. Especially, yeah.
Your case only works for the privileged households. Most households do not have the alternative to prioritize financial needs. Please be comparative.
I think being rich and poor isn't going to be the delta in this debate. Rich families are going to be rich, poor families are going to be poor. And even if you're, so therefore, what happens is that you need to observe the preferences and characteristics of this child. And this is especially true in the school and work hours that parents are most likely not going to be with their kids in their work hours too. Because the time that they're in school and they're in these institutions are going to be the most, first of all, en masse, it's going to be more time. And it's going to be the most important stages in their social development as well. So parents necessarily need to observe what their child is thinking, what their child is feeling in that moment, and give immediate feedback and give immediate support. So, and also, just emotional connection and support only comes from this constant time that you spend with these people, which is very obviously not possible on their end when the parents are trapped in like a 9-to-5 job and they can't spend the majority of the day with them. On opposition, not only do you have less time with the kids, because exclusively on opposition, a lot of the stress that comes from work isn't that you spend the time from 9 to 5 in that workplace. The stress that you get from workplace most of it is emotional. You work under someone, your boss gives you shit about like the things that you do, and you go through a lot of emotional turmoil in your workplace. So even if you have some time to spend with your child, I think that you're going to be less emotionally available and you have less emotional capacity to work through the problems that your child has. On government, because you have one exclusive parent providing emotional support, observing your child constantly, and going through the issues with the child so that they can develop and you can give feedback and you can give support properly, we have just better emotional connection and better nurturing and better parenting. But even if you don't buy this, I think it's better for the relationship itself between the mother and the father. Why is this so? Because on government, you have two distinct areas where the parents are contributing to the household. One is contributing through money, through financial reasons, for financial factors, and one is contributing to more emotional or more supportive or just household factors. This is important because if you have two different distinct areas, it's just harder to quantifiably measure the amount of contribution that you have. But on opposition, the contributions that you have are on the exact same metric, which is even worse because it's quantifiable by numbers. Most likely, there's going to be a salary gap between these parents. What happens is, it means that there's a power imbalance. What happened, the narratives that happen is that I work the same hours or more, I bring in more money. Your contribution is the same thing, you bring money, but you bring less. So, if they say household work is possible by replacing, or household work is possible on their side through just parents working, just dividing labor, I think what happens is that the one parent who makes more money is going to say, oh, I make more money, I bring more into this family. This is very objectively quantifiable. I do more for this family. Therefore, you should do all of the housework. You should do all the emotional connection. And I think this is where bad relationships, unhappy people happen. So the impact is the impact is pretty clear. You have two very unhappy people in a power imbalanced relationship. But you also have trickle-down effects because these toxic relationships of power imbalances where one person is constantly saying, oh, I bring in more to the family, you should do all the work. I bring in more to this family, what are you doing? This kind of blaming toxic relationships, kids look at their parents and learn from these relationships. First of all, they feel very, very insecure in the family. They feel that, oh, my parents are fighting again. This may be my fault, and they feel emotionally insecure. But they learn from these relationships, and the future generations learn from that as well. So I think the impact is far greater than just the parents fighting amongst themselves because they have less emotional support, and they have less time with their parents, and their parents are in just worse relationships. For all these reasons, it's just better for the most important stakeholder that are kids for this debate. Protocols.
Thank you for the speech. Next, I'd like to call the repetition to start off, please. Dohyun.
Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, in this debate, opposition will prove to you how in our world we win on children, we win on family, and we win on a societal level. PM came up here and they only talk about children, right? We agree that children are the most important stakeholders, but I'm going to prove to you in my speech how we also protect the children and how we improve society as a whole on our world. So what can you expect from my speech? Firstly, a few more points on setup and framing, and then I'll be moving on to some responses and then forwarding you one argument. So firstly, some setup. So how does the world look like, right? So in the status quo, we say that within conservative context, often it's one stay-at-home parent, which is the majority of the time is woman, right? And the other one is the worker. I mean, the male is the one working. And secondly, within progressive and secular context, it's often two working parents. And this debate operates and must accommodate the majority of this context. So what are the issues with the status quo, right? We say that one, capitalism is like on the rise. Everything is getting more and more expensive. Inflation is happening. There's like so many issues with the economy. And what this means is that like the cost of living is expensive. But we say that, okay, there's also like somewhat awareness of the stigma against women who leave like work just to be a stay-at-home parent. But our counterfactual here is that we prefer a world where there's two working parents. Because one, it's intuitive to believe that most of the times it's split equally, right? Like if it's not balanced one way or another. Secondly, we say that there's still weekends where they can still spend time, they go out with their children, and they also have holidays. And thirdly, we say in the current working environment, there are policies that within multiple jobs and corporations that incorporate a work-life balance, which means that companies still know that their workers need time to spend with their family, and there are policies for that. No, thank you. So some framing here. In a world where capitalism exists, the job that you have and the amount of children you have is fairly arbitrary, which means that we will win in the scale in providing that there are more benefits to two working parents. So some responses here, right? Why are parents still an important clash in this debate? So even if you buy Gov, in scale, they lose out on parents. Firstly, the condition and the emotional stability of parents affects the household. Like, for example, the regret of working moms for having to give up their dreams just to be a stay-at-home parent. Secondly, this means that this would affect their household, right? That's why most children are still unhappy with a stay-at-home parent. Secondly, the anxiety that exists within parents. We say that since they have less income coming to their family, they're going to have to worry about, oh, how would I serve food on the table for my children? How would I ensure the best education, the best opportunities for my children? Thirdly, on the romantic relationship between both parents, it's going to be less, right? They're going to have more fights because now there's a power imbalance. They say that it's worse on our side, but we say this is not true. This is worse on their side because when one has the leverage that they bring more money, that you have to be the one doing all the housework. You have to be the one who spends the majority of the time with the child. That's your duty. So moving on to my argument here. So firstly, why do households require two working parents? Firstly, the cost of a household is because of the cost of the household, right? There's utility bills, tax, child education, healthcare insurance, being a significant expense to their lives. Secondly, the ability for parents to have a choice is limited, given the fact that they have to prioritize their children's needs as well, like putting food on the table. Thirdly, on the aspect of stability. This works for parents in terms of not being as worried about their financial responsibilities. And this would translate into them being less showing less signs of anxiety, and then their children would perceive that, oh, yeah, my parents are stable, they're happy, they can spend more time with me. I mean, I'm not a burden to them as much. Yeah, and thirdly, for children, they also perceive the fear of the breadwinner losing their job, right? Oh, what if my dad loses his job? Oh, am I a burden to them? Do we have we don't have that much money, and my mom has to take care of me. They feel that burden. And children still need to emotionally be able. Children's needs emotionally can still be co-opted because even a little attention means a lot to children. Therefore, prioritizing their necessities like education is still accepted. I have two working parents, and I know they both love me, and I know they go out of their way to spend time with me. And we say that this is true on our side because parents have the incentive to get closer to their children regardless of having to work. I'll take a point.
You're not being comparative. You have more emotional stability, more emotional support. Why do you have more on your side?
We never said we actually have more, right? Even if we accept the trade-off that they spend less time, but we say that parents will still want to love their children. They still have the incentive to emotionally connect with their children anyway. So maybe it's less time to emotionally connect, but at least both parents can connect, right? And we said this is actually better. So the second analysis here is, why is it problematic in a preferred motion when you have the ability to decide a world where one working parent and one stay-at-home parent? Firstly, on narratives. Women being stay-at-home, the narrative would be that women are the ones staying at home, right? And men are the breadwinners. And women have to give up on their dreams, even if it's a stay-at-home dad. Even if it's a stay-at-home dad, it's going to be the other way around, where the dad has to give up their dreams. So it's there's no benefit, or there's nothing good for either of them. Secondly, the dynamics of relationships, right? We say that the stay-at-home parent will have to fully depend on the working, and this affects their dynamic in their romantic and their their parental relationship, and this creates a power imbalance. Thirdly, on the unequal pressure from society. Society will tell you that if you work, you love your children less, and that pressure isn't shared equally. So the impact of this is, one, for children. For children, more often than not, children gravitate towards a stay-at-home parent. And this is problematic because one parent is the favorite and one is the resented one because, oh, you don't spend time with me, you only care about work. Secondly, one parent is seen as less or not educated. And we don't want children to think their stay-at-home parent is less educated because they're not working. And it's also harder for children to conceptualize the idea of equality, right? Why is this important? One, children are young and they require attention from both parents. And this engages with Gov's best, and that is still problematic. Second impact here is for parents. One, they feel guilty. Even if this is symmetrical, this is still worse under offside. At best, Gov proves balance of duties from parents, but at most of the time, the harms outweighs the benefits given the fact that the prerequisite for happiness is, in most households is still financial stability. Proud to oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Next, I'd like to call on Dohyun. Thank you.
The first thing I will respond to is this idea on financial burdens. The first thing I would posit is that they, at best, assert that a lot of these families are financially burdened. I will also counter-assert that a lot of families that are middle class are also in our model as well, which oftentimes just like is a bit unclear as to why that has to be the majority of instances. If you look at empirically speaking, a lot of families do have like one working parent, one stay-at-home parent, a lot of them are middle class, just empirically speaking. The second thing is, I would say the poorest households are probably not relevant to the debate because a lot of these are probably like just blue-collar work anyway. The margin of difference that you get as to like one more parent working doesn't make a large difference, so the margin is largely unclear. But the two things I'm going to do is to weigh this argument, right? The first thing I would say is the argument on child and dad relationships outweighs this because the amount of happiness is not a necessary or is not an absolute condition of how happy you are. However, how happy you are is more directly connected to the actual experiences that you have within the household, because this is the type of, like, the experiences in the household is where you spend the majority of your time. You spend the 50% of your time in these households in the first place. So if you're unhappy in these households, you're unhappy for 50% of your life, and you're also unhappy for the other 50% because you have to go to work and interact with coworkers that you frankly do not like. But the second weighing over here is, at best, they prove that there is some harm for some small subset of cases. We prove that the harm applies for majority of cases, which is why on the number of cases, that should also outweigh their cases as well. The second thing I'm going to respond to is the idea on feminism. They say, oh, a lot of societies are super oppressive, women are going to be forced to work in the household. I would posit that if it is true that a lot of these societies that they try to frame it is in super conservative societies, oftentimes they also have things like wage gap difference, for example, which oftentimes just means that women are probably going to be oppressed on their side as well. The man's going to say, oh, you're earning so little, you're not contributing enough to the family, you should do more household work after you come back from work, for example. So there's probably a lot of discrimination symmetrically on both sides as well, if it's the most conservative societies. So that's probably not the debate. The second thing is, they say, oh, a lot of people have to forego their choice. I would positively say that, like, a lot of people don't do their dream jobs in the first place. A lot of people just don't get to land their dream jobs. Like, maybe I want to be a doctor. Not everyone gets to be a doctor, for example. The majority of people don't, largely because there's like a, capitalistic structure which means you have to compete with other people that might be better than you. Like, which oftentimes just means like a lot of people just hate their work in the first place. I'm not sure why people opt into being like, you go to businesses, people don't opt into that, right? Like, a lot of you work in debate academies as well. Like, a lot of you probably also hate that, right? The third thing is like, the child is going to feel burdened. This is obviously not true because you, as a parent, don't bluntly communicate all like financial difficulties to the child. Like, you don't, a lot of these like financial conversations are usually kept between the parent, which is why like the discussions and the burden is not directly placed onto children. The reason for this is given by LO, because the LO says parents care about children, which is why they don't directly say, oh, you are the burden, you are the blame, you're the reason why I report, right? The last thing I'm going to say is, oh, you can, they say the last ditch effort is like, oh, both can connect. Like, this is really symmetric because then we can also claim that the working parent can come home and then try to connect. So this is really uncomparative. I don't think that's something they can run. Before I move on, go.
You have to trade off one parent being the bad parent. If it is true that children require immense emotional support, please engage in the reality where children require both parents emotionally.
So, we explained to you why both of these parents are emotionally unavailable. At least on our side, you have one parent that is emotionally available, which is probably the margin in this debate. The first thing we explained to you is that emotional connection oftentimes requires availability. It means two things. Number one, you need the energy to listen. But the second and most important thing you need is emotional capacity. And this is where the incentive analysis falls. Because we explained to you that there's no capacity for you to do this in the first place. Maybe the incentive to exist, like care about the children exists symmetrically on both sides, but the capacity doesn't exist. Because no, a lot of work is very emotionally draining. Household work is also very tiring to a certain extent. Sure, but the nature is more likely to be physically tiring compared to things like, for example, like going out in the workplace, which are oftentimes more emotional and interpersonal in nature. So that means that if you go to work, you have to be crammed in the Tokyo subway every morning. You have to do things like working under a boss and pretend to like them. You have to do things like interacting with co-workers that you don't necessarily like, for example, because you don't choose your co-workers, right? All of these things mean that at the end of the day, when you come back to your home, you have less emotional capacity left to listen to your child's rants about what happened at school in the dinner, for example. So maybe you try to pretend to listen, but you don't actually listen, for example, or you don't show signs of emotionally, like tolerating them, for example, which oftentimes means that in the long run, children are just less willing to open up to you insofar as they feel like you're not actually being listened to, so on and so forth. The second reason is because obviously it's also more time consuming. Like a lot of work commitments also happen like after the work is over, for example. You oftentimes like work late into the night as well. Sometimes you also have to do things like going out to drinking sessions with your bosses so that you can like make them very happy, like specifically in Northeast Asia as well, right? Which means that the delta here is not the incentive, it's the capacity. But the second thing is we explain to you why this is the most important, because oftentimes you need a lot of guidance as a child, right? A lot of these are going through first-time experiences. A lot of them have questions about their relationships. A lot of them have questions about what's good behavior, what's not good behavior. So you need someone that is willing to be listening to you, that is willing to be trustworthy to listen to you. The reason why this is comparative is because they can say, oh, but there are other adults you can talk to. Sure, there are adults you can talk to, but there's limits, right? A lot of these other adults also have their own families, for example, to care about. They're also quite busy with their other work, for example, which is why they found, or these parents are the most interested in you, they know the most about you, and they have the largest incentive to care about you, which is the largest difference in this debate. The second thing is obviously because a lot of family-child relationships also affect things like attachment styles, which means that it also like just bleeds into the long run as well. So if you didn't get a lot of love from your parent as a young child, usually that also just means that you're more likely to be avoidant, for example. There are actually psychological studies that prove this, which means that your other relationships also become worse. So it's not just this one relationship that is bad. The reason why this is very important is very easy, I think very well proven by Yuhyeok. He gives you why there's no consent to be born, why oftentimes there's very little agency, but the scope of harm is also just large insofar as this affects all relationships in the future and not just one relationship. The third thing we explain to you is why you get better relationship dynamic, because I would posit that you're more likely to be careful about your relationship, you have less intrusion into each other's lives insofar as you're working in different spheres, because sure, there is a recognition that you do not understand what they're doing to the fullest extent, which is why you're more careful about it. But in a world in which you have people working in the same sphere, there's more recognition that like you have similar experiences, and therefore there's more leeway for you to intervene and say, oh, I work as well, like why are you complaining about your work, for example. But the second thing is there's more objective criteria to measure your contribution, which means that on their side, like if it is true that there are two working parents, obviously one will earn more than the other one, which means that there is now one criteria to actually measure the contribution. On our side, you cannot measure the contribution because these are different in nature, which means that oftentimes what you default to is just not, or less intrusion overall, because you can't directly compare, right? Which oftentimes means that if it is true that there is already stigma against not respecting women, it's also oftentimes more likely on our side than people respect each other's sphere of life, and therefore recognize that you contribute to the household in this way, other one contributes to the household this way. Two impacts. The first is a principal impact about why this just means that for both these people, they feel respected more in that relationship and therefore are more likely to be happy. The second impact obviously is that if there's more quarreling because people are trying to intervene in each other's lives, that also oftentimes bleeds into the child as well, because the child grows up in an environment where there's a lot of hostility. The child grows up in an environment where parents are very emotionally tense, which oftentimes also just means that they're less likely to go into these parents in the first place because they seem very busy, so on and so forth. Because of all these reasons, very complicated.
Thank you for the speech. Next, I'd like to call on the dialogue. Kesha.
children to grow to their full potential in two-parent households, we think it is optimum to ensure they receive a balance of love, care, and time from both parents. Only under side opposition does this occur. Quickly though, side proposition's whole case rests on the idea that parents will not be able to have a work-life balance. We'll tell you why at least this is better under our world, but we also think that at this point, if this is the crux of their case, it can be simply taken down at the point where we told you that firstly, a lot of these jobs are 9 to 5 in the first place. Second though, there are a lot of healthcare policies or other sort of policies like paid leave policies that are implemented in status quo that ensure that parents can at least cater towards their children's needs to some extent, right? Two things I'll do in this speech then. First, some refutations in case rebuilding. Second, a substantive on how households with working parents often lead to children having healthier relationships. Firstly, PM comes up to say that parents spend more time with their children, can observe their preferences, and somehow like morph them into the person that they want to be, right? Firstly, on emotional connection, we think that the time you spend with children that is actually valuable in terms of emotional connection often occurs during times like dinner or during times like weekends, right? Where you actually converse with these children when they're not, for example, at school. And so we think that this is not like, the difference in this is not as large of a scale to the point where they want to paint, right? The magnitude at which this emotional connection does not occur under our world. But secondly, on the idea of parents constantly being like a hawk observing children, we don't think this is necessarily positive to their case. Because firstly, if you as a stay-at-home parent feel like you have given up your dream, you're probably going to, for example, project onto your children by wanting to live vicariously through your children and morphing them into the person that you never could have become, right? This means that you're probably going to helicopter them 24/7 and morph their character into the person that you want it to be. But secondly, if you're helicoptering over them 24/7, you also don't give the children the space or the independence to be able to grow, right? This is the very thing that they want to do. This is the very advice that they want to give. And this actually harms children at the point where you cannot be your own person. You have to constantly listen to this like external figure of your parent like in every single step of your life. Second point that PM makes on how it's better for relationships because you have less comparatives, right? Now you have two distinct contributions, financial and emotional. Firstly, we think this leads to an even worse power dynamic because note that they say that the difference in salary between parents leads to a power imbalance. We think that this is still something that exists in their world because of social narratives, right? Because social narratives will still paint the idea that financial contributions are more important than emotional connection. Two reasons for this. Firstly, like they said, finances are more easily quantifiable. Therefore, it is easier for you to use it as a leverage and say, I make the money versus I support our kid and somehow make our kid a better person, right? But secondly, financial contributions are oftentimes seen as the prerequisite to you being able to emotionally connect. And so, of course, society is going to place more value into the person who is making a financial contribution. The difference here is that it's even worse under their world where one parent makes absolutely no financial contribution at all, right? This is when it's able to be weaponized against them to an even larger extent versus the comparative. Then, and quickly on the point of women also, right? At least in our world, even if women make minimal income in the worst case scenario, at least they make some income. The difference here is that firstly, they are not feeding into the narratives that you are simply pawns to be financially controlled and manipulated by the men within your lives, right? But secondly, at least having some income means that you have some leverage, some autonomy over your family as opposed to under their world in these very conservative contexts, none at all. And then they talk about how there's no capacity for parents to connect with children because it's draining, right? And you don't want to emotionally connect. But if they say that parents have the incentives to care for your children and not project your own problems onto their children, this is their own characterization, right? Then we think we can co-opt this as well. And we can say that our parents would also want the best for their children. Our parents, if they are home, would probably not project all of their tiredness from work onto their children, right? But even if you don't buy this panel, we think that a lot of time parents who go to work see home as a place for solace, see home as their escape from the draining routine of 9 to 5, so they're probably going to want to be happy at home. They're probably going to see their children as the light at the end of the tunnel, for example, and want to be present in these children's lives. Moving on to the extension then on why households with two working parents often lead to children having a healthier relationships with their parents. Before that,
in your most conservative societies, women don't earn much anyway, which is why the leverage is very minimal.
Yeah, which is why I told you that even if the leverage is very minimal, it's better than having no leverage at all, right? The difference in conservative households is that under both worlds, even if we take the trade-off that the leverage is very minimal, their world, women have no leverage. Women cannot even have autonomy over how they spend their money because they have no money that is not their husband's, for example, right? Moving on to the extension then. Firstly, on why relationships between parents that children witness are going to be healthier, and secondly, on the interaction parents have with children. Firstly, we think that in terms of relationships between parents, oftentimes having one stay-at-home parent often leads to the build-up of emotions like resentment and regret. A few reasons. Firstly, as my first speaker said, a lot of times these parents have to give up on their dreams and goals, and it's intuitive to believe this, right? Even if they want to say that a lot of people have to
give up on their dream, that doesn't mitigate the idea that these parents are also part of that bracket of people who have had to, for example, give up their career aspirations. Secondly, though, you are told by society as a stay-at-home parent that you have an easy job, right? So you're probably going to build up resentment, and a lot of times that resentment is probably going to play out in you being angry at your partner who is, for example, possibly subject you to these conditions. But thirdly, you're also fully financially dependent on your partner, meaning that you probably feel like you have no autonomy separate from them. You're probably going to feel resentful for the things that they control over your life as well, right? But even if this resentment is very small, panel, we still think it materializes. Even if you don't fully tell your children that I am angry at your dad, for example, it still materializes in the ways that you interact with in front of your children, right? The friction that you have, the tension that you have within these relationships is likely to be larger at the point where one parent feels resentful against the other parent. This is very important then, because in long term, it reflects how children view relationships as well, right? The ways that you see your parents interact directly affect how you see your relationships in the future with society. But secondly, on interactions between parents and children, we think in both worlds, parents are incentivized to devote some of their time to caring for children. This is taking them at their best. The difference here is twofold. Firstly, on ability, which they want to talk about, right? It is intuitive to believe that if one parent is working instead of two, they are probably going to opt for higher working hours or opt for more overtime work, for example, which means that this working parent necessarily has less time than the two individual parents on our world to devote to parenting. But secondly, we think it's easier to opt out for one parent of parenting under their world, right? Because when you are both working, there's this expectation that when you are both free, you should also devote your time to, for example, caring for your children. Whereas if you have one parent who's working and one parent who's stay at home, it's easier for the working parent to say, oh, this child, I'm so tired today, and this child is already your responsibility, so I am going to opt out of parenting because I am the one who's been at work from 9 to 5 every single day, right? And this means that even if we take the trade-off that the time that each parent has to spend with their children decreases, we think that there's more of a balance for children. This is very important because from children, you're likely to grow from this because firstly, you experience more styles of parenting, right? You experience parenting from both perspectives. Maybe you have one strict parent and one more lenient parent. But secondly, your parents are individuals who you can learn from. And so if you are able to connect with both of them, you are able to learn from more experiences and more perspectives. This necessarily is a benefit for children, which they claim is the most important actor in this debate. So proud to oppose.
Thank you for the remark. Next, I'd like to call on the WIP teacher from the government. Here.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, 3 things to clarify in this debate. The first thing is this is an assessment whether or not where all things are being equal, which model is far more leading to happier families, whether you all have equal finances, equal attention spans, etc. To what degree can you have quality relationships overall? But second, I think parent acknowledges their roles to begin with before starting a family, in which one has to be a financial provider, one has to be nurturing, one has to do more educational aspect. I don't think it's very clear for them to just assert why essentially one has to, both has to unreasonably work and still not be able to do, and still just focus on that regard. But 3, I think a lot of societal structures based on, like, let's say they say paid leaves, like such as vacation leaves in your corporate works, are not usually that benevolent. A lot of these structures are very much limited. Maybe you can have 1 time off, 2 times off per month, or even much less in a quarterly basis. But the last thing is, even if one parent is likely to become more the financial provider versus the nurturing one, that person could actually be earning twice as much, and having more the capacity to earn as a financial provider. Whereas if you have 2 people working together, they might not even be earning as much, or probably one has the burden to even work more, 2 jobs, and still compare their partner being as a less capacitated partner in this type of relationship to begin with. Therefore, all these harms and all these clarifications does suggest why the working model in such a society today is less ideal when you have 2 people working together and trying to cope up with the stress of work, and in addition to that, sustain a family. 2 issues therefore. 1, where they have happy families, to which I will be talking about the happiness in terms of how much physical capacity you can give. Second is the emotional capacity. Why is it healthier and outside the house? First, roles need to be understood in families first there's always a financial aspect to it. There's always going to be asymmetric needs that will be present in both this debate, right? But the nurturing aspect is often disregarded from opposition side, because this is where essentially you have less emotional bandwidth, physical bandwidth, and a lot of ways in which the spheres of what a family needs are seemingly neglected. What this means is that as a parent, you have to juggle a wide diverse sets of tasks. You need to be a caretaker, emotional comforter, provider, communicator, physical guidance. Ops problem covers less ground to fulfill these household needs beyond the necessity of finances or just a little bit emotional capacity to that extent, because the bandwidth for other things that has to be met is much more significantly not dealt with or too imbalanced. Even if they can do this, parents have limited amount of energy overall. You have to wake up 6 a.m., you have to rush to the subway, you have to make sure that you go to the 9-to-5 job that you have to work for your boss with, you have after work culture, drinking, socializing. You go home and try to have dinner and cook, but oh wait, I still have to teach my kids with their lessons in school. I still need to teach my kids how to cook, how to learn their family values. I still need to take them to hospitals for health checks, etc. How much physical energy do you have left after working 2 jobs? If they say weekends are enough, well, we say that these are weekends that can be used only for these parents to replenish their energy after working hours, after a rough time in the week. But secondly, what ultimately implicates in their world is that the depletion of energy over time becomes larger and larger, because you cannot escape these works or structural boundaries that you're coerced to begin with as a parent who works 9 to 5, much more if there's 2 of you. The child secondly feels neglected over time, but 3, parents sacrifice ultimately their health and underperform even if they take turns or shifts to whoever watches. Their health declines and significantly gets sick. But I want to clarify further. You don't have limited energy at all, because as a parent you age. You're not necessarily young forever. That's why the physical aspect degrades overall. You have to be smart, especially at the onset of starting your family. These are things that they can never avoid, they can never easily recover from. But secondly, on the mental aspect of every parent, you're likely to be burnt out, and at the point in which all the problems topple on top of each other, it becomes a point of comparison to which parent is performing much more better in the same standard or metric by which they provide to their family. They will probably try to have blame games of why can't you earn more? Why can't you have 2 more jobs? Why can't also you be nurturing while working as much as I can? All these things cannot be seemingly be fair on the opposition side and assert to be good all the time. Our comparative avoids these harms when A, we recognize a plethora of responsibilities, therefore the bandwidth has to be spread out, at best equally distributed, or at least the let's say for instance the welfare for emotion, 1 for emotions, 1 for wealth. But second, remember a child's growth and balance formation is an amalgamation of what they experience from their parents. If their attention span, attentions that they receive is significantly low, if the bandwidths for other things are not holistically provided, then much less is their capacity to make a good understanding of their world, much less is their capacity to ensure that, oh, I feel loved by the parents, but it's actually not, to the extent that they also feel like their parents' responsibilities just tokenistic and they feel like they're just there for being a provider at best. Lastly, it's also important that that on our side also you handle things like tiredness in multiple ways. At least it happens in different facets. I'm tired after teaching my child. I'm tired after providing for my child after work. At least I'm tired for earning for my family, which means the bandwidth to meet all the sustenance and the needs of the families are much more spread out to the extent that these children have their capacities to grow on a more holistic sense. Yes?
Couldn't parents use their love to fuel their drive to emotionally connect? Even if they're tired from work, they would still take the initiative to connect.
Yeah. So love is not enough. Obviously, you have to have capacity to manifest how you want to love your children to begin with, how you ensure that the love is of optimal value and optimal sense to the child, because what love to you as an adult is not always communicated properly as proper love to the child itself. Second issue, why we win emotional capacity. We say that children do not have the full developmental faculties yet. That's why they largely operate on emotions and act on misbehaviors if they have low attentions anyways. But second, if this creates lasting effect to the psychology of the child, ultimately, if they feel like they are less, let's say, they're less
given attention by their families or their parents overall. This means that they feel less satisfied in their lives. They feel like their parent doesn't have time for dinner or snack time, or at least when I have time for questions. This means at the very best, you have to you have to be intentional with your energy. You have to be intentional by the time your child comes up to you, and you cannot make alternative ways of them for growing up and learning other value systems, especially outside of a family context where it's supposed to be safer, where it's supposed to be more and more secure. Rather, they would learn these values, let's say, what it means to drink alcohol, what it means to repress your emotions, etc., elsewhere in ideas or influences that may not be optimal in their lives. Therefore, in these crucial development times, they're less likely to provide emotional bandwidth, capacity, and physical capacity to provide for their child.
Thank you for the speech. Next, I'd like to call on the weak speaker from the opposition. Yuhyeok.
If you notice panel, government's benefit mechanizes only within conservative settings, but they do not want to engage in these particular instances. Because notice, at the point in which they say you are given roles at the start of your particular relationship, when you have people who opt into this particular idea, most of the time the people who do subscribe to this particular type of case are usually ones who live in conservative settings, which means it's problematic at the point in which they are unable to fully engage in the context that was characterized by LO. We think it still particularly stands. But let's just kind of understand, kind of be very charitable here. Let's say this debate actually happens in a semi-progressive state, which I think is most probably likely, right? The first thing to note is that there's going to be some sort of narrative or pressure against one parent over the other. So even if you're the most liberal, in the liberal setting, in the most understanding setting, there will be some sort of narrative against the parents who probably did not give enough in contribution towards this particular household. But secondly, if they say that this debate is not about severity of the context over the other, we think this is inconsistent towards their case. Because in their world, suddenly children can believe in equality, which is, by the way, unproven. This is problematic. Because firstly, within moderate settings, we think of work-life balance policies that we brought up within first, versus the emotional support that they want to bring up, at best becomes symmetrical, simply because it still means that one parent is unable to give the full emotional support towards the child anyway, which means at best it becomes symmetrical, at worst it means more resentment towards one particular parent that is unequal. But let's just try to engage in this a lot more better, right? Because at the point in which they were very uncharitable to have a comparative for the parent who is going to be necessarily the bad parent, this means firstly that the narrative becomes a lot more important, because the women who are left to live their dreams, the fathers who are essentially left to say that they have never a form of connection with their children, this becomes a tipping point in understanding what actually works in this debate. Because if this debate is about scale, we don't just win in terms of children, but we also win in terms of parents, because the conditions of their parents determines how they're able to actually make a healthy household. Anyway, these are the particular things that are very important, left unengaged by government side. That's very, very sad. Before that, yeah.
So if your deputy says that there are a lot of leaves that are given, doesn't that mean that the society prescribes a lot of value to household work and sees it as valuable?
The first thing I'm going to extrapolate here is, firstly, you are unable to actually control the narrative that you live in, given the fact that I've proven to you that most of the time the people who subscribe to the one working parent household anyway are probably parents who do agree and assign gender roles within multiple societies. It means narratives still exist. They need to prove a form of counter-narrative against it. They didn't, which means it still particularly stands. The second thing I want to note here is what exactly is urgent in this debate, because this is very important panel, given the fact that you're trying to prefer one over the other. Firstly, to understand is what's most proximate. Within what's most proximate within multiple households are things like bills, education, and utilities. This means at a point in which we're being charitable here, by the way, that even in our worst, where your kid is depressed, we think this is still going to be arbitrary anyway. You're unable to actually determine if your child is actually possibly happy or possibly depressed. But financial responsibility becomes a tipping point specifically for parents because firstly, they have to think about what is urgent first. They can't just make sure their kid is happy without actually providing, for example, education, or providing food on the table, without providing interest for their hobbies, for example. But secondly, in understanding that they're supposed to prioritize their children's needs anyway, we think the only way they're able to mobilize this is simply by having parents who are able to, for example, have the education necessary. That's why they're working, for example, and have the ability, for example, on weekends or holidays, for example, to be able to interact with their children. We think then, at the point in which they say that love is not going to be enough, no thank you, this is problematic because they're the ones who also say that this one parent can give sufficient love towards their child. And the question here is, what is making this particular one parent at home running and like making sure that they pour in pure love towards their child? It's simply to prove to you that there's always going to be an incentive for parents to want to give in and to want to actually pour in love towards their children because that is the most intuitive, because that is the most proximate and responsibility that they have to particularly abide to. But second thing to note here is the emotions of children, right? No thank you, because if they agree that emotional support is very necessary, note that your children still require both parents being within the picture anyway. So government at their best has a child who is happy, but then again, in order to gain the benefit that they didn't prove, but the skill that they tried to prove was super duper huge, it means that, for example, they still require that one working parent to be present during dinner, to be present during holidays. But when they don't engage in the comparative, where one parent is going to be still the bad parent, two problems occur. Firstly, there is a form of work-life balance that still exists under our side, so they have to take this particular comparative to agree that maybe there's going to be some sort of balance in both parents. But secondly, children wouldn't be happy once again, because at the point in which you see the same parent over and over again, but you're unable to see the other parent anyway, it's problematic. Which means this debate happens in a world which has some sort of policies where parents are able to have days off, have weekends for their children, because that's problematic for their kids anyway. We think this debate is arbitrary, so in order for it to be like mobilized in the best way possible, the household needs to be somewhat a healthy household, so you wouldn't have two bad parents under our side and suddenly one great parent at work and one great parent at home under their side. No thank you. The last thing I want to note here is just engaging with children, because to a certain extent we do agree that they do a good job at trying to prove to you what children are happy, but bear in mind this is uncomparative to the fact that this particular child is still unable to see the other working parent given the context that they tried to characterize. The framing here in understanding the issue on children is, can children actually understand the situation that their parents are put in? Within the point in which we're able to prove to you within first and second that the ideal of capitalism, the fact that things are getting a lot more expensive, education is getting a lot more expensive, these particular utilities are getting a lot more expensive, becomes very important within this particular issue. Because let's understand firstly the incentives of children to understand the situation of their households or the situation of their parents anyway. Because A, the fact that the child is able to see things that are proximate to them and things that are visible. So for example, toys, holidays, things like education. This means that the child is always, for example, able to understand that mom and dad are working for me, mom and dad are working to give me a better life. And that's the reality of the current era that we live in today. But secondly, if you credit their whole, argument on, you have roles within families, so you should be the one who stays at home. All of these things, exactly what WIT essentially says. It means that to a certain extent, even we on opposition can assign roles for children to understand that these two particular parents are working and they're still your parents anyway, and you're the child in this particular context and in this particular role. The way it is, they have to take the burden of one parent essentially still being the one who will still be hated, and the fact that children would essentially be the happiest in totality within their world. The fact that they were uncomparative within the most context that is most proximate to multiple households within status quo, that is exactly when the ballot should go to opposition. Thanks.
Thank you for the speech. Next, I'd like to call the white speaker from the opposition to sum up the case. Take care.
government whip's premise that love is not enough, right? Because side opposition believes they incredibly underestimate parents. If this is the only line of analysis they give you as to why parents are unable to actually show up for their children, we think this is untrue. Love is what drives you to, under their world, work 2 jobs, like they claim parents do. Love is what drives parents to give up on their dreams. Love is what, under side opposition, will ensure that parents can raise children in a balanced household. 2 questions at the end of this debate then. Firstly, which world leads to better relationships? Secondly, which world is better for children and more beneficial? Firstly then, which world leads to better parental relationships? In terms of equal dynamics, from proposition we get this idea that dynamics are more equal because it's harder to compare financial contribution to emotional contribution. This relies on the assertion that lack of quantifiability means lack of comparability. We told you from second that this is not true for many reasons. Even if it is not quantifiable, we told you that society values these things differently because firstly, financial contributions are more tangible, so you're more likely to be able to use it as leverage. But secondly, because financial contributions are seen as a prerequisite to emotional connections, and because you have to be, for example, in a financially relatively stable place to be able to emotionally connect in the first place, and so of course these things are going to be valued more. The difference is that dynamics are more unequal in their world when this financial disparity is larger, right? Of course, when one parent is more dependent on the other, this is going to lead to a more unequal dynamic. But even if parents believe that they're equal, I'll tell you in my second question then why this is harmful. But second point on parents, right? On the idea of resentment. We told you resentment within parents can occur in terms of having to give up your dreams, having society tell you that you have an easy job in terms of being, for example, a housewife, or thirdly, just because you are emotionally and just because you are financially connected to the other person and they dictate what you do, and so you directly feel sort of oppressed by them in some ways, right? Their response is that a lot of people give up on their dreams and that and things like that. We don't think this actually responds to the layers of analysis we gave you as to how this also materializes in the ways that you interact in front of your children, in the ways that this materializes even if this isn't a huge impact, because if they want to say that relationships are so important as to the way that children view life, we think this is exponentially worse under their world when this sort of resentment manifests. But thirdly, we told you that social narratives exist where one of you is going to be demonized either by your children or by society in general, right? Either you're seen as the quote-unquote stupid housewife, or you're seen as the one who is unable to actually be a parent. And so of course this is going to cause resentment or battle between the two of you because you constantly feel like everything is against you in society, right? Second then, on which world is better for children? Firstly, on perceived equality, which is very important because it directly links to how children view relationships in the world. We told you that children do not perceive equality of parents under their world in both ways, right? Because you either, for example, think that one parent who is not working is inferior to the other, or you think that the working parent is you resent this working parent for not making time for you, for example. But this likely leads to a very imbalanced relationship. And their only response to this, by the way, is that in your world, both parents cannot connect, and so there is no equality, or children don't have emotional connection. This is the crux of their case. So if we can take this down, government basically has no case. So let's deal with this, right? Will parents have a work-life balance? In first, we told you that there already exist policies and mechanisms to ensure that in most jobs, you can at least take weekends off. You can have a 9-to-5 regular schedule. We responded, though, telling you many other things about this. Firstly, we told you that parents probably see home as an escape. This is due to their very characterization that they have opted into being parents, and so they probably want to be parents, and so they probably have the incentive to be present, for example. So probably they're not going to see being home with their children as energy training, but rather energy replenishing, right? You're probably going to see children as these source of hope in your life, for example. But secondly, we think under our world it's more balanced because now there's expectations for both parents to have this household duty imposed upon them. Because both of you now have this household duty as something that is present and related to you. And the household duty is not seen as a job for one parent, making it easier for the other parent to opt out if they're tired, for example. This balance occurs then, and the benefits that accrue from this are things like children learning from many parenting styles, or having more individuals in your life telling you and giving you space to learn. But on emotional connection, we also told you that children are more able to grow independently under our world when they're not living as a projection of what their stay-at-home parent wanted to be, but could not, right? That is why side opposition is so proud to oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Finally, we would like to invite the plastic government to sum up the case. Thank you.
if you go to an average school in Korea, and then you ask them, like sort of primary school, and then you ask them, what do you want to become when you get older? People don't say, I want to wear a suit and then I want to go to work. People usually say they want to be the president. But in most cases, you don't get your dream in the first place because of things like competition, because there are always people that are better than you. Which is why even on their side, even if the people didn't stay at home, usually it would be doing things like work, which oftentimes is very unhappy to begin with. So I would say, sure, maybe some people are forced to stay at home. I think that's fine, because in many other capitalist structures, you're also forced to go to work. But I would say also, just work is really unhappy and bad to begin with. I'm not really sure why people want to opt into that in the first place. So I think what this proves at the end is that the idea on individuals being more unhappy because they have to forego their choices is at best symmetric. I don't think it's a large delta that this debate largely trades off. The first question I want to ask is on child. The second question I'll ask is on relationship. The first thing we told you from the very get-go was that this debate isn't about incentive, it's about the capacity. Because we explained to you that sure, household work is hard, outside work is hard. But then the difference over here is that outside work oftentimes takes a lot of emotional bandwidth to begin with. Because it's not just that you do the work, but you also have to interact with people that you don't like, for example. A lot of work and things like promotions are based on how good you are socially, for example, which oftentimes means that it is draining in that way. The reason why this is bad is because you're less available for the child. Obviously what this means is a couple of things. The first thing we explained is that obviously there's less availability for you to actually listen to the child and actively have those dinner conversations and properly listen and engage with it properly. The second thing is obviously you're less observant about the child. So you don't know if your child looks a bit worried. You don't know if your child looks unhappy. And these are conversations you really need to have. Because if your child looks unhappy, you have to go up and ask them, what is wrong? What happened? Did something happen in school? And these are only ways in which you actually have conversations that are really important. At best, what you get on their side is interesting stories, right? They say, oh, you have two parents, you have interesting stories to share. Yeah, you have interesting stories, but you don't get the actual in-depth conversations which are really important for the child's development in terms of doing things like developing your attachment styles, for example, getting actual advice, which are things that you cannot get from other adults, largely because your parent is the most interested in you, your parent knows most about you, and obviously other people have other households to take care of. And then they come up and say, oh, it's going to be a tiger parenting. I would say tiger parenting probably happens in a world in which you don't emotionally connect with them, right? Largely because on our side, if you interact more with them, you realize that these are independent beings. You realize that these people actually do have emotions, these children. You realize that they're independent people that you care about, and therefore you're more likely to be, actively respecting them. I think you're more likely to be target parenting on their side, because on their side, you don't know what's happening to the child, which is why you have to become more strict, because you don't know what the child's going to do outside of while you're in work, for example, which is why you have to end up being more tiger parent on their side, which is why we flip that impact as well. The third thing is they say there are weekends because there are policies. First, this is uncomparative. Weekend is 2 days. The other thing is 7 days, right? The second thing is if their weekends or if their leaves argument is true, that also just ruins their own framing, because their framing is oh, nobody respects household work. But then if it is true that there are a lot of policies, that also kind of assumes that there is a large recognition in society that a lot of this household work is actually important, and that's why you give them leaves in the first place, which is why both things can't stand. But the third thing is sure, they might be weekends, but then we explained to you that work is really hard, right? If you look at my dad, he sleeps for the entire weekend. I'm sure he loves me, but he's very tired. He's sleeping the entire weekend. I'm not sure why the capacity analysis still doesn't stand. But the last thing they come up with, and then the last thing is quite simple. I think the weight is quite simple, right? Maybe you get a bit more money on their side, but we explained to you that this is not the absolute condition for happiness. But we explained to you why things like childhood development are things that actively benefit or actively harm or actively directly impact things that are more proximate to your happiness, like how good your relationships turn out later on, for example, how confident or how comfortable you feel at home, so on and so forth. These are things that you have to experience for 50% of your life, which often just means that you live a very unhappy life. Quickly, last one, relationships. They say, oh, you will blame it for less contributions. The first thing is, it is hard for you to blame if there's different metrics for measuring contributions. On their side, you have to measure it with the same metric. But the second thing is, if it is true that these are the most conservative societies, the women don't earn much anyway because of things like workplace discrimination, which oftentimes just means that it doesn't improve the condition by much. The second thing is, it often just means in our POI that it doesn't bring them a lot of leverage, which means that at best, this is symmetric. At worst, they lose it on a large scale. Because of all these reasons, we're very profitable.
Okay, thank you for debaters. Please go back to Owa and wait for the final.